Welcome to episode 14 of the Goldenberg Destiny Project. Before I begin, I just want to say something about the previous episode where I spoke about how the land of Israel, the Holy Land, cannot tolerate the presence of people that do not do avodah for the Rebbeinu Shalom. Somebody asked me, so why does that? And I said that there's a constant struggle because on the one hand, there is a lot of avodah, on the other hand, there's the opposite of avodah. So that's what's going on. So someone asked me, why doesn't the land expel the ones that don't do the avodah and keep the ones that do the avodah? So the answer to that goes back to chapter 5, episode 5, whatever you want to call it, that Klal Yisrael is one organism. It's one organism and all the individuals are cells on this organism. We don't have two different organisms in Eretz Yisrael. Some of them are people who do avodah, a different organism. No, it's all one organism. Part of it is doing the right thing, part of it is not doing the right thing. That's why there is a struggle. But there's not, we don't, when the organism is expelled, the entire organism is expelled. Okay, let's go to today. It's a very, very important principle in understanding the history of Klal Yisrael and understanding history in general, that the players in history are collectives, not individuals, collectives. Well, every society is a collective. You have to view them as collectives. Of course, individuals do things and they rise as leaders, they do different things, but the collective. We're moving now into the biblical period, and it's not my purpose here to retell the story of the Avos, and it's all in the Torah, Chomish. The whole story is there. What I want to do here is I want to present and to investigate the political landscape of that time, what it was like. I also want to defend the authenticity of the Torah against the arguments of I call them Bible deniers. I mean, I was thinking about it. I needed a term for these people. The Kofrim who say that the Torah was not written at the time, that it was written 1,000 years later and put together from different documents, and that many of the things that are written there are myth, and they're not true, and there are anachronisms. All these people, I needed a term for them. So from now on, when I talk about them, I'm going to call them the Bible deniers. Part of what I want to do here is to show that the Bible deniers are wrong. Rabbi Solomon once told me that my chavrusa, my friend, Zechron Levracha, so that the Gemara says, Mekan tshuva le'elu she'omrim ein Torah min hashamayim. The Gemara has certain proofs to those that say that the Torah is not of divine origin. The Gemara does not say, Mekan raya Torah min hashamayim. The Gemara doesn't prove, this is not brought as a proof that Torah is min hashamayim, that is divine. We know that. We know that because it's our memory, as we discussed back in chapter 5. But this is what you can respond to the Bible deniers. The people that say Torah is not true, this is how we respond to them. So part of what I want to do is a response to those people. And the third thing that I want to do, which is maybe the most important, is to show how all of these, to highlight on certain events and certain concepts, and show how they drove forward the destiny of Klal Yisrael. So today, we're going to talk about Avram. He left Haran, he came to Canaan. He came together with his wife and with his nephew Lot, and I guess Lot's family, and with all of his followers that he gathered around him in Haran. HaNefesh also b'Haran, I don't know if there were hundreds or thousands. I think the Rambam says even tens of thousands, but I don't know if he actually means that as an accurate number or just as a way of saying there were very many of them. Alofim Revavos. he came with a large retinue of followers and disciples, and they came down to Hebron. They both had, Lot and Avram both had a lot of sheep, and sheep need a lot of place. They need pastureland. So there was a problem of Avram and Lot living close to each other because they had big flocks and they would conflict. So Avram told Lot, and there's other things that, there were certain moral issues involved, which I'm not going to get into right now. So Avram told Lot, listen, we have family and I'll always have you back, but we really can't live so close to each other. So you go one direction, I go to the other direction. Where do you want to go? So there was Kikar Yarden, the valley of the Jordan River, which went down all the way down alongside the river, past the Yam HaMelech, and that was a very fertile valley. So Lot decided that he's going to settle there. So he went south, and he went Vayel ad Sodom. There was a complex of cities at the lower end of the Yam HaMelech, was Sodom, Amora, Admah, and Tzvoya and Goyim. So he went all the way till Sodom. He didn't actually go into Sodom. He was out in the pasture land near Sodom. Later we will see that he actually moved into Sodom. But at that time, he went there. Avram went the other direction. He went up into the hill country. He went to Beisel. That's where he went. These cities, the population of Canaan was they're all descendants of Canaan. Canaan was the son of Ham. And there were many different tribes. The Hittite and the Yevusi and the Amori and the Chivi and the Girgashi and the Prisi and the Canaani. Now Canaani was really not a tribe for itself. It was a collection of little tribes. So instead of calling them by all these little small clans, it was all called the umbrella Canaanim. But everybody, all of them were also Canaanim. There was also another Canaanim, which were Sidonim. They were the oldest of the Canaan sons, and they were up in Lebanon. But in Canaan, these are the 7 tribes that lived there. Sodom was not part of the Canaanim. The Pasuk says that in Noach, that the Gvul of Canaan, the border of Canaan, was from Sidon, Boyachas Doim ad Lesha. That means from Sidon, which is in Lebanon, down in the direction of Sodom until Lesha. That means Lesha was before Sodom. So the Gvul of Canaan was till Lesha. Sodom was past Canaan. So the people of Sodom were Semitic people. They were not part of the Canaanim, but they lived in this area. The Canaanim, they had 31 city-states, and each city-state had its own king. And that was the patchwork. It was a patchwork in Canaan. The people of Sodom were not Canaanim. Sodom was part of the Babylonian Empire. When we talk about empires in the ancient world, there were 2 kinds of empires. One was called a tributary empire. That means that really the imperial power, which is the central power, which exerted power over the entire empire, did not govern all of the empire. It governed itself, maybe some things around it, but the outlying areas, they were little city-states or little provinces that paid tribute. They paid taxes. They used to contribute to the empire, and the empire protected them from other people, but they didn't govern them. It was like a protection racket, where they say, okay, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to protect you, and you give me money, and that's it. They didn't take care of them, they didn't govern them, they didn't give them any services. They were tributary states. The Achaemenid Empire of Persia was also a tributary state, had like over 100 provinces, And in varying degrees, some of them were tributaries, some maybe were a little bit more governed by the imperial power. But that was tributary empire. And the Han dynasty in China, which goes back also about 2,000 years, was also a tributary empire. They had the kingdoms around China pay tribute to the Hans, and that was the Han Empire. But they didn't really have administration in those places. The Babylonian Empire was a tributary empire. So the cities of Sodom, these confederation of the 5 cities of Sodom, they were tributaries of the Babylonian Empire. The Torah tells us about what happened with the Babylonian Empire and the tributary cities of Sodom, Amorah, Admah, Tzvayim, and Goyim. It says that Vahibime Amraphel, the Chazal say that's Nimrod. So there are 4 kings. Now, the Babylonian Empire was an interesting kind of empire. It had a wrinkle. They had 4 empires, four smaller empires who confederated. They became like one confederation, and each one of these empires had their own tributary states, but they organized as a group of 4 empires, so that if there was any problem anywhere with a neighboring empire or with a tributary state, then all 4 together would come down and enforce the arrangement of the empire. So there was Amraphel, was the king of Shinar, and he was like the senior, number 1. Arioch Melech Elosar is number 2. Kedar La'omer of Elam, which is like near Persia, is number 3. And Tidal Melech Goyim was number 4. The pasuk says that the cities of Sodom served Kedar La'omer. That means they paid tribute to Kedar La'omer. So even though he was the 3rd king mentioned, but the tributaries were paying tribute to him, not to the others. The others were coming along for enforcement. So they served Kedar La'omer for 12 years. They paid tribute for 12 years. And the 13th year they decided, enough's enough. They were apparently wealthy cities. They were far away from Bavel, and were about 1,000 miles away. And to go to Sodom, you couldn't go due west because there was a big desert there. So you had to go north along the Euphrates River into Syria, and then turn down and go into Canaan and come till Sodom. In total, that was about 1,000 miles. They're very far away. So they figured, okay, 1,000 miles away, pay 12 years, enough. Okay, so the 4 kings decided you can't have that, you can't have rebellion. So they decided they're going to come and enforce it. So things move very glacially in the ancient world. They stopped paying the tribute, so they didn't come the next day or the next month. They came in the 14th year. That means well over a year till they got together, they organized the army, and they're going to have an invasion. An invasion of the army of 1,000 miles is a very serious undertaking, and it took a while. In the 14th year they came. So in the 14th year, Ba'ar Bas Hashanah, Ba Kedar La'omer, he was the one who was receiving the tribute. V'amalachim asher ito. The other kings that were with him, that means they were confederated with him, but it wasn't their tribute, it was Kedar La'omer's tribute. Other times it would be Amraphel's tribute, and Kedar La'omer would come. That's the way you can understand from the Psukim, that was the arrangement. So they were going to Sodom to get it. And V'yaku es HaRephaim, they, I guess you say they smote, but that was like hundreds of years ago. They crushed the Rephaim, and Ashtra is Kanayim, and then the Zuzim, they crushed the Zuzim, or they smote them in Hum, and then the Amim in Shavakir Yisayim. So they're traveling and they're smoting people all the way down. They one after another. They didn't get to Sodom yet. It's a Chayri Baharam Seir, and the Chayrim in the Seir Mountains, at the El Paran, Asher Ala Midbar, till the Midbar. Vayeshuvu, when they turned around, I'm going to show you the map in a moment. Vayevoyu el ein mishpat, they came to the Kodesh. Vayaku was Kolsdei Amaleki, they smote the entire Amaleki plain. There were no Amalekim at that time. The Torah is identifying it for us that they're Amalekim, but Amalekim were born much later. But there were other people living there, and they smote them too. And then they were on the approaches to Sodom. Then they came out and to do battle. They defeated these Sodom people, Sodom people. They were no match for the imperial army, and they were all scattered into the mountains, and they all ran away. Some were killed, some ran away. So then the imperial army, the Babylonians, they took Kol Rechush Sodom v'Amora, they took all its wealth, Veskol Achlam, and all their food, Vayelechu, and they left. Vayikchu es Loit v'Rechushay, they also took Loit. V'hu Yashed b'Sodom, how did they get Loit? Because at this time, Loit was already, we saw before that Loit was until Sodom, but now he'd already moved into Sodom, the Pasuk tells us, and they took him too. So they took the Rechush, and they took Loit, and they left. The Torah makes a point of telling us that they took Loit, because that was a very significant part of the story, because that's going to bring Avram to come to his rescue. Avram ran after them, he mobilized his people, and he chased after them, and he caught up with them up in the north, and he defeated them, and he rescued Lot, and he got back all the treasures. So, and then he came back, and there was a story where the king of Sodom told him to keep the treasure and give me the people. V'yoshev was kol rechush, he returned the chush and Lot. V'gam anoshim ves ha'am, he returned the people. So really, we had not been told before that the imperial army took the people, but here we see that they returned the people, so they did take the people. So why did they take the people? It was not for slaves, because then they would have told us they took the treasures and the food, and they took slaves, which says many times that every people taken into slavery. That's not why. So which people did they take, and why did they take them? They also took the treasure. What was the wealth of Sodom? If it was sheep, first of all, the people that had the sheep usually were not living inside the city. They were living somewhere else. But if it was sheep, then they wouldn't be able to take the sheep, because we see in Vayishlach that when Yaakov meets Esav, and he tells them that he should come with them, so he says, Adon Yodeya ke'elodim rakim v'atzayim v'abakar olois edefokum yamechod, if I'm going to make them rush, v'meisu, they're all going to die. You can't take huge flocks of sheep and, just make them go quickly. They really go slowly, a little bit this, you go maybe, if you go half a mile a day, you're doing great. And, you're going to take the sheep, you can take them back 1,000 miles. It's going to take forever. So it was not the sheep. It was something else. I think what their treasure was that Sodom was like a manufacturing center. They made that goldsmiths and silversmiths and potters, and they produced a lot of merchandise. And that merchandise, people bought it. There was important, valuable merchandise. So they took all the treasures that they had. I don't know how much cash there was. There was some cash, you see later, when Avram bought the Maras Machpelah. But I think they carried off all the cash, and the people that they took were the artisans, the goldsmiths. They didn't take just regular people, the people at a grocery store. They didn't take those people. What did they need a grocer for? Schlep them all the way back to Bovel. They took the goldsmiths, the potters, the artisans. Those are the people they took. So the pasuk in the beginning doesn't mention it, because they took the rechush, and the rechush came along with the rechushers, the people who make the rechush. They took them as well. Okay, I'd like to show you a map of the invasion route of the Babylonian armies. This map is in the back of the Bereshis Chumash and the Art Scroll Makros Gdoil. This is really very excellent Chumash. And one, like, they went to Ashtoreth Kanayim. I wouldn't know where Ashtoreth Kanayim is, but I'm assuming that they did their research and they know. So they came down here, and they went to Ashtoreth Kanayim, and this is where they smote the Rephaim. Then they continued. Now here is the Jordan River and the Yam HaMelech. And they came down like this. Ashtoreth Kanayim, wherever, these places. They went all the way down here. They turned around, and they came like this, and they came back up towards Sodom. This was the route they took, coming all the way from Bavel, up the Euphrates, into Syria, down here. This is Syria here. They came down here, on the eastern side of the Jordan River, all the way down here, and around, and back up, and they approached Sodom from the south. This is a pretty circuitous route. Why did they do this? Why did they have to go like this? Why didn't they just go like this? Why didn't they come over here and go straight across Sodom? Now the reason is the topography. On the eastern side of the river, the Jordan, there's a range of mountains, and the mountains are close to the river, and sometimes they actually come like right up to the river. So you really cannot. I mean, maybe you have like a little place to walk, but you can't bring an army with siege machines. You can't bring them down alongside the river. But behind the mountains, there's a plateau. It's called the Jordanian Highlands. This is where most of the population in Jordan lives today, in the highlands. So they went down the highlands. And the highlands are pretty broad, sometimes maybe like 40, 50 miles wide. So they marched down south along the highlands, and the mountains are still going here. So they couldn't cross. So they down the highlands, the mountains came down, they end around here, where there's a desert, as the pasuk says. So they went till the desert. Then they crossed a small desert into the south of Canaan, and they went back up. And why did they smote all these people here? Smote? Why did they do that? So my good friend Yankee Friedman helped me figure this out. That they needed to live off the land. They couldn't bring everything they need all the way, transport everything from Bavel. So as they traveled, now these places here, Ashtoreth Kanayim, were not part of the empire. They were just like towns, and they were not wealthy enough for the empire to take them as tributaries. So they resisted. They didn't want to give up all their food and their supplies, so they had to smite them, and then smite them, and them, and them, and them, until they came around here. And over here could be the Kol Stei Amaleki was also to protect their rear, that they shouldn't have any danger from the rear when they're attacking Sodom. So this is what they did. Came like this and came around. And it came like this. And they had their battle, and Sodom lost, and the rest of the story, as I mentioned before. The question is something else. The question is, on the west bank of the Jordan River, there's plenty of room. It's mountainous, but there's the Bikah, we know now, there's a valley there alongside the Jordan River on the west side. So instead of coming down on the east side through the Jordanian highlands and go all the way down deep into here, past all the mountains, into the desert and come around from the bottom, why didn't they just go a little further and come down on the western side of the river? They come down the river. I don't know if Sodom is actually here. It's around there, at the southern point of the Yam HaMelech. Why didn't they just come around here? That's the question. Now, getting back to the Bible deniers, they said originally that there were no chitim. The pasuk speaks about the chitim, b'nei ches. They said there's no such thing. This is a fictional people. They didn't find any traces of chitim, of Hittites. That was the beginning. And then they did an excavation, and they did excavation north. They found that there was a very big Hittite empire, which had its capital was Bogaskoy near Ankara in Turkey. And the empire reached all the way down into Canaan. All of these Canaanite peoples, they're all part of the Hittite empire. And in the Psukim, you see them. Of course, they see that the B'nai Ches, Avram, when he came, he spoke to the B'nai Ches and the Hamaretz. The B'nai Ches and the Hamaretz. Who were the B'nai Ches? They were the Chitim. They were the administrators. The Chitim, the Hittites, were not like the Babylonians. The Babylonians, the empire was tributary. They went out and they said, okay, we're going to protect you and you're going to pay us money, a nice protection racket. That's what they did. The Hittites, on the other hand, had more of an empire the way we know it, like a Roman Empire or a British Empire, where the Romans actually governed. They had the top layer of government was Roman or British. In India, it was like the British. They were the government. The Chitim were the government. So they were the B'nai Ches. The B'nai Ches were the ruling class. They were the aristocrats. Now, there were people that worked for the government that really were not ethnically Hittites. There were people who worked for the government that could have been other ethnicities. Could have been Emorim or Prizim, something, but they were all called B'nai Ches. They were all the ruling class, the governing class were all called B'nai Ches. And I'll show you this, again, the Bible deniers. The Bible deniers, they have different documents. It says, Vahi Esav ben Arboim Shana, he was 40 years old, and he took a wife as Yehudis Bas Be'eri Hachiti. She took this wife, Yehudis, who was a Chiti woman. There's Basmas Bas Eloi Hachiti, also a Chiti woman. Two Chiti women. One was called Yehudis, and one was called Basmas. Now, if you look in Vayishlach, in the genealogy, Esav Lachanoshav B'dois Canaan. He took everybody's Canaan. It's Odo Bas Eloi Hachiti, which is Odo's Basmas, as Rashi explains, but Basmas was what she was called. It's like a nickname. Her name was Odo, and she was the daughter of Eloi Hachiti. Odo Bas Eloi Hachiti, right? That's Olivama Bas Ono Bas Sivyon Hachivi. Now, Olivama, the second wife, over here is called Yehudis, because she made believe that she was very from, pious. So she was called Yehudis. They called her, but her name was not Yehudis. Her name was Olivama, and she was the daughter of Be'eri, and she was a Chivi. So here we have a contradiction. Here she's a Chiti, and here she's a Chivi. So, must be written by two different people. But that's not what it is. Here we're telling the story of Esav, who he married. These were the women that he married, that's what they were called. They were both Chitim. That means they were both from the ruling class. Both of them were Chitim. But in Vayishlach, where it tells us the genealogy of Esav, then you really need to give the name that says on their passport, not that what they're called, around the neighborhood. So you have to give their real name, and you have to give their ethnicity. One was a Chiti, one was really a genuine Hittite, and the other one was a Chivi. But they were both Chitim, they both belonged to the government. So here we see the Chiti Empire. So if the Babylonians had come down on the east bank of the Jordan, they would have come into Chiti territory. So all those cities, in those 31 cities, they were all like sub-cities of the Chiti Empire. So they couldn't attack, they couldn't go to them and conquer them and make them into tributaries because they were part of the Hittite Empire. They couldn't even pass among them without stepping in the cities because they would be passing through Hittite territory. And they weren't about to start a war with the Hittite Empire. They just wanted to give a punitive mission to Sodom to make them pay up the tribute. But they weren't about to start a war, so they had to stay on the west side of the river, and they had to go down the highlands, past the mountains, all the way down, halfway into the Negev, down to the Midbar, where the mountains come to an end, go through that little Midbar, and come around from the bottom, and then they could attack Sodom. Okay, so next time I want to talk about the Plishtim, which is another significant people in this area, but it's a discussion for itself. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again next time.